He can appear out of nowhere, like a spirit.
Geronimo!
Even the soldiers fear his name. The desert feeds us, and it shields us from our enemies.
This is the untold story of how Geronimo eluded death and capture for 25 years. A story of spirit over steel, faith over fire, and a man who refused to die by any hand but destiny. What if I told you that the most hunted man in American history wasn't an outlaw or a killer, but a father, a healer, and a man fighting to reclaim stolen land? For 25 years, the U.S. Army and the Mexican military chased Geronimo across 10,000 miles of burning desert. Yet every time they thought they had him cornered, he disappeared. And what if everything you've heard about his capture, his surrender, even his death, was part of a story written to erase who he really was? Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to iRich History. In the summer of 1886, the legendary Apache medicine man and guerrilla fighter Geronimo was being hunted across the unforgiving deserts of northern Mexico by nearly a quarter of the entire United States Army. Once again, he had gone back on a promise to surrender, a tactic he used more than once, and now, with only a small band of followers, he was on the run while 5,000 American troops and 3,000 Mexican soldiers scoured the borderlands to capture him. Among the Chiricahua Apache, Geronimo was believed to possess not only the sacred healing powers of a medicine man, but also a supernatural shield that made him untouchable in battle. His people said no bullet could kill him, and for decades it seemed true. For 25 years, Geronimo defied capture, slipping through mountains and canyons while his name became both feared and mythologized in newspapers across two nations. The U.S. Army's massive campaign of 1886 wasn't just a manhunt. It was a final attempt to crush a 25-year war between the U.S. government and the Chiricahua Apache of the American Southwest. For centuries, the Chiricahua had roamed their ancestral lands, stretching across present-day Arizona, New Mexico, and deep into Sonora and Chihuahua in Mexico. But after the Mexican-American War ended in 1854, the U.S. claimed thousands of miles of Apache territory. Soldiers came next, then settlers. Conflict was inevitable. Throughout the mid-19th century, skirmishes between the Apache and white settlers were common, but the spark that ignited all-out war was the Bascom Affair. When Apache raiders kidnapped a young boy, a series of disastrous negotiations turned into bloodshed on both sides. In response, Cochise, the Apache chief, led a retaliatory strike against a Union outpost in the Battle of Apache Pass in 1862, the official beginning of the Apache Wars. Geronimo fought at Apache Pass, though he wasn't a chief like Cochise. He was a medicine man, and on that battlefield it was said that he moved through flying arrows and bullets unharmed. Legend says his invincibility came from the god Usan, who granted him divine protection after his wife and children were murdered by Mexican soldiers. In mourning atop Bowie Peak, Geronimo prayed, and Usan's voice answered through the wind, "You will never die in battle, nor will you die by gun. I will guide your arrows." Years later, an artist painting Geronimo's portrait claimed his body bore as many as 50 bullet scars. Yet in his own autobiography, Geronimo admitted to being wounded only 8 times. Among his people, stories spread that he could see the future, slow the flight of arrows, and even hold back time. One tale tells of Geronimo awakening suddenly in the Sierra Madre Mountains, declaring that their brothers 120 miles away were under attack, a claim later proven true. Another story describes a night raid when Geronimo, leading 60 warriors toward the San Carlos Reservation, began to sing. "He wanted morning to come only after we crossed the mountain," one warrior recalled. So Geronimo sang and night stayed for 2 or 3 hours longer. Of course, some say Geronimo's powers had more earthly explanations. The Chiricahua were fighting in their homeland, explains Amy Cassidy of the Fort Bowie National Historic Site. They knew every canyon, ridge, and water source. They could disappear where others would die. For centuries, the Chiricahua Apache were nomadic hunter-gatherers, intimately familiar with the harsh landscapes of the southwestern United States. They lived in small matrilineal bands, hunted jackrabbits, deer, and coyotes, and built temporary dome shelters called wickiups. Raiding wasn't savagery, it was survival. The Apache raided for supplies, horses, cattle, and sometimes prisoners. To the settlers invading their lands, the Apache became a nightmare. Mexican ranchers even called Geronimo the devil himself. While many U.S. commanders saw the Apache as enemies to be exterminated, a few began to respect their skill. General George Crook, one of the most famous Indian hunters, described them as unmatched in endurance and instinct. He convinced Geronimo to surrender in March 1886, only for the Apache leader to vanish again under the cover of night. Crook once said of the Chiricahua, "Acuteness of sense, perfect physical condition, absolute knowledge of locality. We have before us the tiger of the human species." Crook even enlisted Apache scouts, including Chiricahua warriors, to track Geronimo. Yet time and again, the elusive leader outsmarted both U.S. and Mexican troops. One reason was his unique use of horses. The Apache used horses as both transport and food, Cassidy explains. Geronimo would ride his mounts to exhaustion, covering 70 miles a day, then butcher them for meat, stealing fresh horses from Mexican ranches or cavalry posts. According to an 1883 article in the Daily Democrat titled "The Wily Apaches," Geronimo and his ally Chief Jew once stole 2,000 horses, including 60 from the Mexican cavalry. "The Apaches have outgeneraled the officers in command," the article read. "Their maneuvers have been most skillfully executed." Geronimo's most effective weapon, however, was his interpretation of surrender. In 1883, General Crook finally cornered him. Claiming he was weary of running, Geronimo agreed to surrender and was given 2 moons to gather his followers. He eventually appeared nearly a year later and settled briefly at San Carlos and later at Turkey Creek. But reservation life was intolerable. Their raids were replaced by farming. Their sacred drink, Tiswin, was banned. So once again, Geronimo and other Apache leaders like Nana and Naiche slipped away. During that fateful summer of 1886, Captain Emmett Crawford used Apache scouts to track Geronimo deep into Mexico, capturing his horses and supplies. Geronimo sent word that he would surrender the next morning. But before he could, a group of Mexican soldiers, mistaking the situation, attacked the Americans and killed Crawford. From a nearby hill, Geronimo reportedly watched the chaos, laughing. In September 1886, Geronimo finally surrendered for the last time. The Chiricahua Apache had been captured and sent to Florida, including his wives and children. General Nelson Miles promised to reunite him with them soon, but that reunion took 2 years. Geronimo spent his remaining years in captivity, far from his homeland. He appeared in Wild West shows, posed for photos with tourists, and even rode in President Theodore Roosevelt's inauguration parade. But freedom, real freedom, was gone. He died at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in 1909 at the age of 79. Still, even death didn't end his legend. In 1943, an Army reporter visiting Fort Sill met an elderly Apache who claimed that soon after Geronimo's burial, Chiricahua warriors secretly removed his body and returned it to their homeland in the desert Southwest. Even in death, it seems, Geronimo escaped once more. In the end, Geronimo's story isn't just about a man who escaped capture. It's about a people who refused to surrender their spirit. For 25 years, he defied armies, governments, and even death itself. But when the guns finally fell silent, what did freedom mean to a man who had been hunted his whole life? They caged him, paraded him, and tried to turn his rebellion into entertainment. Yet the myth they created couldn't contain the truth. Geronimo's real power was never his invincibility. He believed that no one could own the land or the soul of the Apache. So perhaps the question isn't how he eluded capture, but why he ever had to run in the first place. Because maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous thing about Geronimo wasn't his defiance, it was his freedom. Kindly subscribe and share this video with others. Thanks for watching.